14 stories above the Baltimore pavement, Rey Rivera supposedly took a leap that defied the laws of physics. But the hole he left behind tells a far more impossible story. In the spring of 2006, the historic Mount Vernon neighborhood of Baltimore was a sanctuary of quiet, upscale living. But beneath the shadow of the elegant Belvedere Hotel, a gruesome discovery was about to shatter that peace, leaving behind a mystery so profound that investigators are still arguing about the physics of it today. Rey Rivera was a 32-year-old aspiring screenwriter and former water polo coach who stood at an imposing 6 feet 5 inches tall. Friends called him a gentle giant, a man who looked like an old-fashioned movie idol with a bright future ahead of him. He had recently moved from California to Baltimore with his wife Allison to work for a financial newsletter run by a close childhood friend. Life seemed to be falling into place. But on May 16th, around 6:30 in the evening, everything changed in a heartbeat. While a house guest sat nearby, the phone rang. The call was traced to the switchboard of Rey's employer, Agora Publishing. Rey answered, shouted a panicked, "Oh shit!" and sprinted out the door as if his life depended on it. He left the house, lights blazing, and his home office in complete disarray. He didn't even stop to put on real shoes, running out into the humid Baltimore evening, wearing nothing but a pair of flimsy rubber flip-flops. He vanished into the night, leaving his family desperate for answers. But what they would eventually find would only spawn 1,000 more terrifying questions. The circumstances of his departure made absolutely no sense for a man who was usually so grounded and responsible. It was as if he was running toward a fate he couldn't escape, or perhaps away from a threat no one else could see. What happened to Rey Rivera over the next 8 days is a puzzle that defies logic, reason, and the fundamental laws of gravity. We are going to look at the impossible physics of a 14-story plunge, analyze the bizarre, microscopic note he left behind, and uncover the chilling reality that someone, somewhere, knows exactly why he ran out of his house that night. This isn't just a story about a tragic death. It is a journey into the mind of a man who was terrified by something unseen. He was either pushed to his doom, coerced into an unwinnable situation, or forced into a deadly game of cat and mouse. If you are fascinated by unsolved mysteries that challenge everything you think you know about forensic science and human behavior, make sure to subscribe and stay with us. We explore the darkest, most baffling cases in modern history, and you won't want to miss the revelations we uncover as this investigation deepens. Because as we dig into the timeline of Rey's final days, the official explanations begin to crumble. We are left looking at a terrifying abyss of corporate secrets, silent witnesses, and a parking garage roof that holds the key to an impossible leap. The truth is buried somewhere in the debris of that hotel annex, and we are going to find it. The Belvedere Hotel is a Baltimore landmark, a towering architectural marvel of brick and stone that has hosted royalty and presidents for over a century. By 2006, the building had been converted into luxury condominiums, its grand halls echoing with the quiet lives of its wealthy residents. Behind the main tower sits a lower annex, housing an abandoned racquetball court with a heavy metal roof. It is a lonely, forgotten space, collecting dust and the occasional piece of debris blown down from the higher floors. On May 24th, 8 days after Rey sprinted out of his home, His colleagues were searching the top floor of a nearby parking garage that overlooked the Belvedere. As they peered over the concrete ledge, their eyes caught something strange on the annex roof far below. It was a jagged, violent hole punched straight through the thick metal, as if a meteorite had struck the building. The edges of the steel were peeled inward, pointing down into the dark, locked cavern of the old racquetball court. The smell of decay was already beginning to waft upward into the warm spring air. But there was something else, something incredibly unsettling about the scene. Right near the edge of that jagged hole, perfectly intact, lay a single flip-flop. The sheer violence required to tear through that heavy metal roof was catastrophic, yet the flimsy shoe was completely undamaged, resting on the surface as if it had been gently placed there. This small mundane object would soon become one of the most debated pieces of evidence in the entire case, suggesting a scene that was meticulously staged rather than a chaotic accident. Rey Rivera wasn't just a name on a police report. He was a fiercely loyal husband, a passionate, creative spirit, and a man who loved his family above all else. His wife, Allison, was the center of his universe. They had recently married, and Rey was determined to build a beautiful life for them in Baltimore. He spent his days writing screenplays, editing video projects, and working hard to secure their financial future. Friends described him as the kind of guy who would drop everything to help you, a man whose presence brought an undeniable sense of safety to those around him. He was a former athlete, strong and capable, yet possessing a profoundly gentle soul. But Rey also had a few well-known traits that defined his everyday life, and one of them was an intense, paralyzing fear of heights. He absolutely despised being near the edges of tall buildings or looking down from balconies. The mere thought of standing on a towering precipice would make his palms sweat and his heart race. He would actively avoid situations that triggered this phobia, preferring the solid ground beneath his feet. This deep-seated terror makes the discovery at the Belvedere Hotel not just tragic, but psychologically incomprehensible. Why would a man who was deathly afraid of heights willingly climb to the top of a 14-story building, let alone step off the edge? It is a contradiction that haunted Allison and every single person who knew him. It suggests that whatever drove him to that roof was more terrifying than the fall itself, a hidden pressure that we are only just beginning to uncover. The Belvedere Hotel is a masterclass in Beaux-Arts architecture, but its storied history has a darker side that cannot be ignored. For over a century, this towering brick landmark has been a silent witness to several tragic suicides. In every previous instance, the laws of gravity were absolute and predictable. Those who chose to jump from the upper floors or the roof fell straight down, their bodies recovered on the sidewalks or the immediate pavement at the base of the main tower. It is a grim, vertical reality. However, the trajectory of Rey Rivera completely shattered this historical pattern. The hole in the metal roof of the annex was not at the base of the tower. It sat an incredible 45 feet away from the edge of the main building. To clear that immense horizontal distance, a person wouldn't just have to step off the ledge. They would have to take a full, athletic, sprinting leap from the roof, launching themselves into the night with the speed of an Olympic long jumper. And Rey would have had to achieve this feat in the pitch black of night, from a roof that is notoriously difficult to access, all while wearing flimsy rubber flip-flops. The physics of the scene don't just suggest a struggle. They suggest a physical impossibility that the official narrative simply cannot explain. When the police finally descended into the damp gloom of the abandoned racquetball court, the hope that Rey might be found alive vanished instantly. His body was in an advanced state of decomposition, and the injuries he sustained were catastrophic. His ribs were shattered, his lungs were punctured, and both of his legs had been brutally broken by the impact. While the medical examiner ruled the cause of death as severe blunt force trauma, the manner of death was left as undetermined. It wasn't a clear-cut suicide, yet there wasn't enough evidence to prove a homicide. This ambiguity placed his wife Allison in an agonizing moral dilemma. She could accept the whispered theories of the police, who were eager to label it a suicide, and close the case to avoid further public scrutiny. Or she could risk her own sanity and financial stability to relentlessly pursue a truth that many powerful people wanted to stay buried. Allison chose to fight. She refused to believe that her husband, a man with a paralyzing fear of heights who had just rushed out of his house in a panic, would suddenly decide to take an impossible, athletic leap from a building he had no reason to visit. She began her own investigation, scouring his office and questioning everyone he knew, determined to defend a dead man's honor against a narrative that made no sense. The more that Allison and independent investigators scrutinized the evidence, the faster the suicide theory began to unravel. There are physical impossibilities at play here that the official story ignores. We know Rey's body was found inside the court after smashing through a heavy metal roof, and we know the impact was violent. But consider the items found near that hole. One of Rey's flip-flops was discovered on the roof, entirely undamaged, but marked with strange drag patterns that didn't match the surface. Even more baffling were his mobile phone and his glasses. They were found resting on the roof near the hole, completely intact without a single scratch. It is a forensic miracle for a pair of fragile eyeglasses to survive a 14-story drop onto a metal surface perfectly. These items weren't dropped. They were staged. They were placed there by someone after the fact to create the illusion of a fall. Furthermore, the roof of the Belvedere was highly secure, requiring navigation through restricted areas and locked doors that should have triggered alarms. Yet, no alarms were tripped, and no security cameras captured Rey's entry. If you find these contradictions as disturbing as I do, please subscribe to the channel. We rely on your support to keep digging into these impossible cases and bringing the truth to light. The physical evidence was only the beginning of a much deeper madness. The physical impossibility of the fall forced a shift in focus. If the crime scene didn't provide answers, perhaps the motive was hidden in the chaos Rey left behind. Allison spent hours searching Rey's home office, and eventually she found something extraordinary. Taped securely to the back of his computer monitor was a small folded piece of paper. The text was microscopic, printed in a font so tiny it was almost illegible, and the content was utterly bizarre. It read like a chaotic stream of consciousness, referencing Freemasonry, secretive Hollywood societies, and a list of prominent figures who had died under mysterious circumstances. It included cryptic phrases about volcanoes erupting around the world and explicitly named his friends, family, and colleagues at Agora Publishing. The FBI was brought in to analyze the document, searching for a hidden cipher or a suicide note. However, behavioral analysts concluded it was neither. It was something else, a bizarre manifesto, or perhaps research for a screenplay that had begun to bleed into his reality. What do you make of a man hiding a microscopic note behind his computer? Does it sound like a mental break or a desperate attempt to hide information in plain sight? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. This discovery linked Rey's frantic departure to a deep, underlying paranoia that no one had fully recognized until it was too late. The discovery of that microscopic note shifted the entire investigation toward Rey's employer, Agora Publishing. The focus narrowed on the frantic phone call Rey received just minutes before he vanished. Police successfully traced that final call, the one that caused Rey to shout, "Oh shit," and sprint out the door in his flip-flops. It originated from the main switchboard at Agora. However, because it came through a central hub, it was impossible to determine which specific extension or person had dialed his number. When detectives attempted to interview Rey's colleagues and his childhood friend, Porter Stansberry, they hit an impenetrable brick wall. The company's leadership immediately sought legal counsel, and a gag order was allegedly issued, instructing all employees not to speak with the police or the media about Rey Rivera. The very people who had known him best, the ones who had moved him across the country for this job, suddenly refused to cooperate in the investigation of his death. This wall of silence transformed a tragedy into a sinister conspiracy. Why would an innocent company refuse to help find the truth about their own employee? What financial secrets or corporate liabilities was Rey exposed to while editing their newsletters? Allison and the lead detective realized they weren't just fighting a cold case. They were up against a well-funded, highly organized entity that wanted this book permanently closed. Everything we thought we knew about that night shatters when the pieces are finally assembled. That frantic phone call from the Agora switchboard wasn't a random inquiry. It was a targeted summons, a lure designed to pull Rey out of his safe home and into the dark streets of Baltimore. He was in such a hurry that he didn't even change out of his flip-flops, and those shoes tell the real story. You cannot crash through a heavy steel roof with enough force to shatter your legs and puncture your lungs while leaving a flimsy rubber sandal resting gently and undamaged on the jagged metal. The pristine glasses, the unscathed phone, the lack of security footage, it all points to a terrifying reality. Rey Rivera did not jump from the roof of the Belvedere Hotel. In fact, he was likely never on that roof at all. His paralyzing fear of heights wasn't overcome by a suicidal urge. It is the very proof that he would never have gone up there willingly. The evidence screams that Rey was killed somewhere else, perhaps beaten or dropped from a much lower height, and the scene was meticulously staged to look like a suicide. That bizarre microscopic note wasn't the rambling of a madman, but a desperate attempt to document the secretive world he had been pulled into at Agora. The company's sudden silence wasn't just corporate caution. It was the final lock on a door hiding the brutal nature of a murder. Rey Rivera didn't fall into an abyss. He was pushed into one by people he once called friends. The true horror of Rey Rivera's death is not just found in the violent impact that ended his life, but in the calculated, cold nature of what followed. When we look at the evidence, we are forced to confront the logistics of a nightmare. Rey was a massive man, standing 6'5" and weighing 260 pounds. If the scene at the Belvedere was indeed a fabrication, it required a coordinated effort to transport his body and maneuver it into that abandoned racquetball court. Someone had to decide exactly where to drop him from a lower vantage point just to punch that specific jagged hole in the metal roof. Then came the stagecraft. They had to carefully arrange his glasses, his cell phone, and those flimsy rubber flip-flops near the edge to sell a story that the physics simply would not support. This was not a random act of violence or a sudden mental break. It bears the hallmarks of a highly orchestrated operation, one designed to exploit the tragic history of a local landmark to hide a crime. For Allison Rivera and Rey's family, the trauma was doubled. They were not just grieving a husband and a brother. They were being gaslit by a system that insisted a man with a paralyzing fear of heights had suddenly decided to sprint off a roof in sandals. It highlights a terrifying reality of our modern world. With enough capital and a wall of high-priced attorneys, the truth can be buried under layers of legal static. A blatant staged crime can be transformed into an unsolvable mystery, leaving a family to wander through a maze of unanswered questions, while those responsible continue their lives in the very same city. In the months that followed the medical examiner's undetermined ruling, the energy behind the investigation began to evaporate. The Baltimore Police Department, faced with a total lack of cooperation from Agora Publishing and no definitive crime scene to process, allowed the case to drift into the archives. Even Detective Michael Byer, one of the few who openly called the scene staged, found himself reassigned after only 3 weeks on the case. Allison Rivera eventually realized she could not heal in the city that had taken everything from her. She packed her belongings and left Baltimore behind, but she refused to let Rey's memory fade into silence. She took her fight to national television and streaming platforms, meticulously documenting every inconsistency she found. Meanwhile, the man who had first brought Rey to Baltimore, his childhood friend Porter Stansberry, remained shielded behind a wall of corporate silence, continuing his lucrative career without ever speaking publicly about the tragedy again. Even the physical scars of that night were eventually erased. The Belvedere Hotel repaired the annex roof, patching over the hole with fresh metal. The abandoned racquetball court was locked away once more, returning to its state as a silent, empty tomb that briefly held the darkest secrets of a family's shattered life. The tragedy of Rey Rivera serves as a haunting reminder that the most dangerous forces do not always lurk in the shadows of an alleyway. Sometimes they hide behind corporate switchboards, legal gag orders, and the prestigious facades of historic buildings. We are left with the chilling realization that we may never truly know the people we work beside, or the lengths to which the powerful will go to protect their interests. The physics of Rey's fall remain impossible, but the cruelty of the silence surrounding his death is a very real human failure. This is the point where the official story ends, but the search for the truth continues with people like you. If you believe that justice for Rey is still possible, and you want to join a community that refuses to let these stories be buried, please subscribe to the channel. By staying informed and keeping these conversations alive, we ensure that the truth can never be fully erased. Together, we can shine a light into the corners where others would prefer total darkness.